In this video, we're diving deep into the disturbing underbelly of America's longest-running animated sitcom. Most people know The Simpsons as a wholesome family comedy about a lovable oaf, his patient wife, and their 3 kids navigating life in the small town of Springfield. But beneath the yellow skin and 4-fingered hands lies a world far darker than most viewers realize. We're talking about brain damage played for laughs, annual suicide attempts treated as running gags, environmental disasters that would make Chernobyl look tame, and a billionaire who's literally too evil to die. This is the complete dark lore of The Simpsons. The show debuted way back in 1989 as a series of shorts on The Tracy Ullman Show, before becoming its own half-hour program. Over 36 seasons and more than 760 episodes later, The Simpsons has evolved from sharp social satire into something that occasionally ventures into genuinely disturbing territory. What started as clever commentary on the American family and consumer culture gradually began incorporating elements that, when you really think about them, are absolutely horrifying. The writers have always walked a fine line between comedy and darkness, but sometimes that line gets crossed in ways that leave you wondering how this ever aired on network television. The brilliance of The Simpsons has always been its ability to hide sophisticated commentary behind silly jokes and cartoon violence. But that same cartoon format also allows the show to get away with things that would be completely unacceptable in live action. When Homer strangles Bart, it's funny because they're cartoons. When Mr. Burns blocks out the sun or dumps nuclear waste at playgrounds, it's satire because it's animated. When Moe attempts to hang himself, it's dark comedy because these characters always reset by the next episode. Except sometimes, the darkness lingers. Sometimes the implications are so disturbing that you can't quite shake them, even when the credits roll and the couch gag plays. What makes The Simpsons' dark lore particularly fascinating is how it's been building for over 3 decades. Early episodes established Springfield as a town plagued by corruption, incompetence, and corporate malfeasance. Later seasons have expanded on these themes, creating an interconnected web of trauma, abuse, and systemic failure that would make any real town utterly unlivable. And the fact that we're supposed to laugh at all of this is part of what makes it so unsettling. We're watching generations of Springfieldians suffer through environmental catastrophes, economic collapse, and routine brushes with death, all while remaining trapped in an eternal present where nothing ever really changes or improves. The show's relationship with continuity makes things even stranger. In most episodes, events are self-contained and have no lasting consequences. Homer can suffer catastrophic injuries, Springfield can be destroyed, characters can die, and everything resets by next week. But occasionally, the show does acknowledge its own history. Lisa stays 8 years old forever, but she remembers things from previous episodes. Homer's jobs change constantly, but his core personality remains. And this selective continuity creates a kind of nightmare logic, where trauma accumulates but healing never comes. The characters are stuck in a perpetual loop of suffering with occasional moments of happiness that ultimately mean nothing because time will simply erase them. Springfield itself might be the darkest element of the entire show. It's a town where the nuclear power plant routinely causes mutations and health problems, where the police are too incompetent or corrupt to stop crime, where the school system is crumbling and nobody cares enough to fix it, where the media openly lies and manipulates, and where the richest man in town actively works to make everyone else's lives worse. every institution that's supposed to protect and serve the public has failed spectacularly. And the residents just accept it because they have no other choice. They're trapped in Springfield by economics, by inertia, by the simple fact that this is where they live and there's nowhere else to go. The Simpsons has always been about the American experience, but it's an increasingly bleak vision of that experience. In early seasons, the satire had an optimistic edge. Things were bad, but the family stayed together and love conquered all. As the decades wore on, that optimism has faded. Now we're left with a town full of broken people trapped in broken systems, and the only thing holding it all together is the thin veneer of cartoon logic that prevents us from seeing how truly horrifying this world actually is. The show has become a mirror reflecting back the worst aspects of American society, and sometimes that reflection is almost too dark to look at directly. Throughout this exploration, we'll examine the moments where The Simpsons stopped being just a comedy and became something closer to horror. We'll look at the tragic backstories that explain why these characters are the way they are. We'll catalogue the crimes against humanity that happen so regularly they've become background noise. We'll discuss the debate about whether the Halloween episodes count as canon, and what it means that the darkest content gets quarantined to special episodes. And we'll try to understand why we keep watching a show that increasingly feels like a document of civilizational collapse disguised as family entertainment. Some of what we're about to discuss is played entirely for laughs. Some of it is disturbing even when you understand it's meant to be funny. And some of it transcends comedy entirely and becomes genuinely upsetting when you think about the implications. The Simpsons has given us some of the greatest moments in television history, but it's also given us content that would be banned in many countries if it appeared in any other format. The fact that it's all animated, all satirical, and all technically meant for laughs is the only thing that's allowed this darkness to exist on primetime television for over 30 years. The nuclear family in a nuclear town. Dark origins. Let's start with the most obvious source of darkness in Springfield. The nuclear power plant owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. The Springfield nuclear power plant isn't just Homer's workplace or a convenient plot device. It's an environmental disaster zone that should have been shut down decades ago by any regulatory agency with even minimal standards. The plant routinely leaks radiation into the local ecosystem, causing mutations in wildlife, health problems in workers, and environmental contamination that affects the entire town. And everyone just accepts this as normal because, well, what are they going to do about it? The most famous example of the plant's environmental impact is Blinky, the three-eyed fish discovered in the waters near the facility. Blinky appears in multiple episodes and has become something of a mascot for Springfield's ecological problems. But think about what Blinky actually represents. And this is a living creature whose genetic structure has been so thoroughly corrupted by radiation exposure that it developed an extra functional eye. That's not a minor mutation. That's fundamental damage to the basic building blocks of life. And Blinky isn't alone. We've seen other mutated animals throughout the series, all bearing the marks of exposure to whatever toxic soup the plant is pumping into Springfield's environment. The plant's safety record is catastrophic even by cartoon standards. We've seen meltdowns, near meltdowns, radiation leaks, improper waste disposal, and routine violations of every conceivable safety protocol. Homer works in Sector 7G, doing a job he's completely unqualified for, surrounded by technology he doesn't understand, in a facility that prioritizes profit over human life. And the fact that Springfield hasn't suffered a Chernobyl or Fukushima-level disaster is due entirely to cartoon logic and blind luck. In reality, a plant run this poorly would have killed everyone in town multiple times over. Mr. Burns's approach to waste disposal is particularly horrifying. In one memorable scene from the classic episode Marge versus the Monorail, Smithers asks Burns whether they should dump nuclear waste at the playground again. Burns notes that the children playing there have started to lose their hair, which is arousing suspicion. His solution: dump the waste at the park instead. This isn't played as the actions of a cartoonish supervillain. It's presented as a routine business decision. Burns sees children developing radiation sickness, and his only concern is maintaining plausible deniability. The actual suffering of those children means nothing to him compared to saving the cost of proper disposal. This casual attitude toward environmental devastation runs throughout the entire series. The plant's cooling towers are constantly belching smoke and steam into the air. The water discharged from the facility glows ominously. Workers regularly handle radioactive materials without proper protection. Safety inspectors are routinely bribed or threatened into giving passing grades. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission exists but seems powerless to actually regulate anything. When Homer briefly becomes intelligent after removing the crayon from his brain, he writes a comprehensive safety report documenting all the plant's violations and sends it directly to the NRC. The plant gets temporarily shut down, but it's back in operation soon enough with no meaningful changes. The environmental impact extends far beyond the plant itself. Springfield's air quality is terrible, its water is contaminated, and its soil is probably too toxic for safe agriculture. We've seen episodes where the entire town is covered in a dome due to environmental violations. We've seen the lake so polluted that it becomes a toxic nightmare. We've seen the sky turn strange colors from industrial emissions. Springfield exists in a constant state of environmental emergency that everyone has simply learned to accept as normal. The residents live shorter, sicker lives because of this contamination. But what choice do they have? Moving takes money most people don't have. And besides, Springfield is home. The normalization of this environmental catastrophe is perhaps the darkest element. When a three-eyed fish becomes the local sports team mascot, you know something has gone terribly wrong with the town's relationship to its own poisoning. When children grow up thinking toxic waste glowing in the dark is just a normal part of life, that represents a fundamental failure of society to protect the most vulnerable. The Simpsons plays this for laughs, but underneath the jokes is a genuinely horrifying vision of environmental injustice. The rich and powerful, like Mr. Burns, live in isolated mansions far from the contamination they create, while working-class families, like the Simpsons, are forced to raise their children in a toxic wasteland. The plant's impact on human health is rarely addressed directly, but the implications are everywhere. Homer has survived multiple radiation exposures that should have killed him or given him cancer. Other workers have suffered similar exposures with varying results. The town's cancer rates are probably astronomical, though the show wisely avoids dwelling on that particular darkness. When you think about how many Springfieldians work at the plant or live near it, you're looking at a potential health crisis affecting thousands of people over multiple generations. The genetic damage alone could affect births for decades to come. What makes this especially dark is that it's based on real patterns of environmental injustice. Poor communities really do get stuck living near toxic facilities because they lack the political power to resist or the economic means to leave. Our regulatory agencies really do get captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. Workers really do take dangerous jobs because they need the money, even when they know the risks. The Simpsons takes these very real problems and exaggerates them for comedic effect. But the underlying darkness is rooted in genuine human suffering. Mr. Burns represents the absolute worst of corporate malfeasance, taken to its logical extreme. He's not just negligent about safety and environmental protection. He's actively hostile to both. He knows his plant is dangerous and polluting, and he simply doesn't care. In fact, he seems to take pleasure in the suffering his business causes. When he blocks out the sun to force everyone to use more electricity from his plant, he's weaponizing the environment itself to increase his profits. This is supervillain behavior, but it's not that far removed from real executives who knowingly poison communities to save money on proper disposal. The nuclear plant serves as a dark foundation for everything else in Springfield. The contamination it creates affects the health, intelligence, and longevity of everyone in town. The economic dependence on the plant gives Burns enormous power over local politics and prevents meaningful reform. The culture of negligence and corruption it fosters spreads to other institutions. Springfield is a company town in the worst sense, and the company is actively killing its employees and their families for profit. This isn't just dark comedy. It's a scathing indictment of how capitalism can corrupt and destroy communities when left completely unchecked by regulation or conscience, and Homer's brain damage and mental decline. One of the most disturbing revelations in Simpsons history came in the season 12 episode titled Hom, when we learned the true cause of Homer's legendary stupidity. After Homer takes a job as a medical test subject to recoup money lost in a bad stock investment, doctors discover something shocking during a brain scan. There's a crayon lodged in his brain, not metaphorically, literally. An actual crayon has been stuck in Homer's frontal lobe since he was 6 years old, and it's been affecting his cognitive function ever since. The backstory is both absurd and tragic. As a child, Homer decided to see how many crayons he could fit up his nose. He managed to shove 16 crayons up there before sneezing them out. Or so he thought. One crayon didn't come out. Instead, and it travelled up through his nasal passage and lodged itself in his brain, where it's been sitting for decades, pressing against brain tissue and causing the cognitive impairment that defines Homer's entire character. When doctors offer to remove it, Homer agrees, and the results are immediate and dramatic. After the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ skyrockets. He suddenly becomes articulate, thoughtful, and intelligent. He bonds with Lisa over literature and intellectual pursuits. He uses proper grammar and engages in philosophical discussions. He sees the world with new clarity and understanding. For the first time in his adult life, Homer is actually smart. And it's wonderful for about 5 minutes before he realizes that intelligence doesn't equal happiness. Smart Homer quickly discovers that being intelligent in Springfield is a curse. His friends don't understand him anymore. His intellectual insights make him unpopular. When he writes a comprehensive safety report about the nuclear plant's violations and sends it to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the plant gets shut down and all his friends lose their jobs. Everyone blames Homer for their unemployment. He becomes isolated, lonely, and miserable despite his enhanced cognitive abilities. Lisa is thrilled to have a father who understands her, but everyone else wants the old, dumb Homer back. The episode ends with Homer making the conscious decision to have the crayon reinserted into his brain. He goes to Moe, who performs the procedure with a hammer and a fresh crayon in an unlicensed back-alley operation that's equal parts horrifying and hilarious. Homer deliberately chooses stupidity over intelligence because being smart has made him too aware of how broken everything is. He literally opts for brain damage because ignorance really is bliss in Springfield. Before the procedure, He writes Lisa a letter explaining that his brief time as an intelligent person showed him how special and strong she is for dealing with being the smartest person in the family all the time. Now, here's where things get really dark. This episode recontextualizes every single moment of Homer's stupidity throughout the entire series. Every time he's done something idiotic, every time he's failed to understand something obvious, every time he's acted like a complete moron, it's all been because of brain damage. We haven't been laughing at a lovably dumb character, and we've been laughing at a man with a literal object lodged in his brain, causing cognitive impairment that affects every aspect of his life. Homer is brain damaged, and we've been encouraged to find that brain damage hilarious for over 30 years. The implications are staggering. Homer's poor performance at work, brain damage. His terrible parenting decisions, brain damage. His inability to control his temper or his appetite, potentially linked to the frontal lobe damage caused by the crayon. His failed dreams and wasted potential, all traceable back to a childhood accident that permanently altered his brain function. The tragedy of Homer Simpson isn't that he's lazy or stupid by choice. It's that he's a man whose entire life has been shaped by an injury he didn't even know he had. And this revelation makes every strangling of Bart even more disturbing. Homer's violent outbursts toward his son aren't just bad parenting or anger management issues. They're potentially the result of frontal lobe damage affecting his impulse control and emotional regulation. The frontal lobe is responsible for executive function, including the ability to control aggressive impulses. Damage to this area can result in exactly the kind of sudden, explosive violence that Homer regularly displays. We've been watching a brain-damaged man assault his child and treating it as a running gag. The episode also reveals Homer's awareness of his own cognitive limitations. During his brief period of intelligence, he experiences what it's like to have a normally functioning brain. He knows what he's giving up when he chooses to have the crayon reinserted. And this means Homer is somewhat aware that he's not as smart as he could be, even if he doesn't consciously remember why. There's a tragic self-awareness buried under all that stupidity. A dim understanding that something about him isn't quite right, even though he can't articulate what it is. What makes this even more disturbing is that the episode treats Homer's decision to re-damage his brain as somewhat admirable. The message seems to be that Homer sacrifices his intelligence to maintain his relationships and his happiness. He chooses family and friends over personal fulfillment and intellectual growth. On the surface, that's touching, but it's also deeply messed up. Homer has to literally damage his own brain to fit into a society that can't handle having him be smarter. The problem isn't Homer's intelligence, and the problem is that Springfield is so dysfunctional that intelligence becomes a liability rather than an asset. The episode also raises questions about all the other times Homer has suffered head trauma throughout the series. He's been hit in the head with countless objects, fallen from great heights, survived multiple concussions, and experienced brain trauma that would hospitalize a normal person. Are these injuries compounding the damage from the crayon? Is Homer's intelligence declining even further as he accumulates more and more head wounds over the years? There are flashback episodes showing young Homer as somewhat more functional than present-day Homer, suggesting a gradual cognitive decline over time. This connects to another dark Simpsons theory, the Simpson gene. In other episodes, it's suggested that male Simpsons have a genetic defect that causes them to become progressively stupider as they age. But the crayon incident undermines this theory, or at least complicates it. Is Homer dumb because of genetics, brain damage, or both? The show doesn't really care about maintaining consistency on this point. but the cumulative effect is the suggestion that Homer's stupidity has multiple causes, all of them tragic. The casual treatment of brain injury throughout The Simpsons is actually pretty disturbing when you think about it. Characters routinely suffer head trauma that would cause serious damage in real life, and it's always played for laughs. Homer gets hit in the head so often that it's become one of his defining characteristics, as the show has normalized head injury to the point where audiences don't even register it as something that should be concerning. We've been conditioned to see brain damage as funny rather than tragic. The Homer episode won an Emmy Award and is widely considered one of the better episodes from the show's later seasons. Critics praised its emotional depth and clever premise, but that praise glosses over the uncomfortable reality that the episode's entire foundation is built on making fun of a disabled person. Homer isn't just unintelligent, he's cognitively impaired due to a physical object in his brain. That's a disability, and while the show occasionally treats it with sensitivity, more often it treats it as a source of humor. We laugh at Homer's stupidity, which we now know is caused by brain damage, and that's supposed to be okay because it's a cartoon. This pattern continues throughout the series. After Homer, the crayon is rarely mentioned again. Homer continues to be stupid, and we continue to laugh at that stupidity, with the knowledge that it's caused by a preventable injury sitting somewhere in the back of our minds. The show has essentially given us a medical explanation for Homer's behavior, and then immediately asked us to forget about it, so we can go back to treating his disability as comedy. That's a pretty cynical move when you think about it. The most generous interpretation is that HOMR is the show commenting on itself and acknowledging the problematic nature of Homer's character. By revealing that his stupidity has a medical cause, the writers are perhaps admitting that they've been asking audiences to laugh at something that wouldn't be funny if we thought about it too hard. The letter Homer writes to Lisa before having the crayon reinserted is genuinely touching and suggests the writers understand there's something tragic about this character and his situation. But that moment of self-awareness doesn't change the fact that the very next episode goes right back to mining Homer's cognitive impairment for laughs. The many deaths of Springfield. Death in Springfield is treated with a casualness that's genuinely disturbing when you stop to think about it. Characters die all the time in The Simpsons, both in the Halloween specials and in regular episodes, and the show's relationship with mortality has always been complicated. On one hand, death is often used for dramatic effect or as the punchline to a dark joke. On the other, the show's loose continuity means that characters who die in one episode can pop up alive and well in the next with no explanation. This creates a strange narrative space where death both matters and doesn't matter at the same time. Let's start with one of the most famous death-adjacent moments in the series: Maggie shooting Mr. Burns. The two-part Who Shot Mr. Burns cliffhanger wasn't technically a death, since Burns survived, but it came close. The revelation that the shooter was baby Maggie added a layer of absurdity to the whole thing. But think about what actually happened. A baby got her hands on a loaded gun and shot someone. That's not funny in real life. That's a tragic accident that would traumatize everyone involved and result in serious legal consequences for whoever left the gun accessible to a child. The episode plays it as a mystery story, complete with red herrings and false suspects. But the dark undercurrent is that everyone in Springfield had a motive to kill Burns because he'd made all their lives so much worse. The schoolteacher wanted him dead. Moe wanted him dead. Even Smithers briefly wanted him dead. Springfield is a town where attempted murder is something that multiple residents seriously consider when someone wrongs them. The fact that a baby ended up being the shooter almost feels like divine justice in the context of how many people wanted Burns dead. Then there are the actual deaths. Dr. Marvin Monroe apparently died at some point, though the show is vague about when and how. Maud Flanders died after being knocked off a grandstand by a t-shirt cannon, a death so random and absurd that it became instantly iconic. Her death was actually the result of a pay dispute with the actress who voiced her, which adds a metatextual layer of darkness to the whole thing. A character died because of behind-the-scenes business negotiations, and the show had to scramble to write her out in a way that made some kind of narrative sense. Maud's death is played somewhat seriously in the immediate aftermath. Ned grieves. The kids are sad. The funeral is treated with appropriate solemnity. But then the show just moves on, and after a while, Maud is rarely mentioned. Ned gets remarried. Life goes on. The emotional impact of losing a spouse and mother fades into the background as the show's eternal present reasserts itself. This is typical for The Simpsons, where even major events like death rarely have lasting consequences because the show needs its status quo back for the next episode. The Halloween episodes, of course, are where death really runs wild. Characters die in spectacular, gory ways in the Treehouse of Horror specials. And it's all supposed to be okay, because these episodes aren't canon. Except the show has occasionally blurred the line on what counts as canon. Ute, the German exchange student, was introduced in a Treehouse of Horror episode, before becoming a regular background character. If Treehouse episodes can introduce canon characters, does that mean the deaths in those episodes have some kind of reality, and the violence and death in Treehouse of Horror episodes has escalated over the years? Early specials had some dark moments, but maintained a relatively light tone. Later episodes have featured genuinely disturbing imagery, including graphic violence, body horror, and character deaths that are played more for shock value than laughs. In one recent episode, the show explicitly set out to make the bloodiest, most violent Treehouse of Horror yet, featuring multiple main characters dying in gruesome ways. Nelson explodes. Sideshow Mel gets his face ripped off by an insane monkey. It's visceral and unsettling in a way that earlier episodes never were. This escalation reflects a broader trend in the show toward darker content. As The Simpsons has aged, it's pushed boundaries further and further, and testing how much violence and darkness audiences will accept from a primetime cartoon. The Halloween episodes serve as a kind of pressure release valve, allowing the writers to explore horror and gore that would never fly in a regular episode. But that separation between Halloween episodes and regular episodes has become increasingly porous. Dark themes that used to be confined to Treehouse of Horror now show up in regular episodes with more frequency. The casual attitude toward death extends beyond special episodes. Springfield has a mob that regularly murders people, and these deaths are treated as business as usual. Fat Tony and his crew are contract killers and organized criminals, and while their murders usually happen off-screen, the show makes it clear that they're constantly killing people. The fact that they're portrayed as somewhat sympathetic characters doesn't change the reality that they're murderers operating with near total impunity in a town where law enforcement is too incompetent or corrupt to stop them. Then, there's the whole subplot of Sideshow Bob repeatedly trying to murder Bart. This has been a recurring plot device for decades, with Bob escaping from prison, plotting Bart's death, nearly succeeding, and then being foiled at the last moment. The show treats this as comedy, but step back and think about it. We're watching an adult man obsessively plan the murder of a child, and we're supposed to find this entertaining. Bob is intelligent and articulate, which makes him charming, but he's also a would-be child murderer who's shown himself willing to kill anyone who gets in his way. In Treehouse of Horror episodes, Bob actually succeeds in killing Bart multiple times. One segment shows Bob killing Bart, reviving him, and killing him again in different ways, just for the satisfaction of it. The segment includes graphic violence and Bart's intestines being visible, which crosses into genuine body horror territory. Yes, it's not canon. Yes, it's meant to be darkly comedic. But it's also showing us a character we know committing the murder he's been fantasizing about for years, and treating that murder as entertainment. The deaths of minor characters often go completely unremarked upon. Background characters can be killed in explosions, accidents, or disasters, and the show just moves on without acknowledging that people died. Springfield is regularly threatened with destruction by various means: nuclear meltdown, environmental catastrophe, angry mobs. And while the main characters always survive, presumably there are casualties among the population that never get mentioned or mourned. The town has been through so many near-apocalyptic events that you have to assume the death toll over the years is substantial. There's also the question of how many people Burns has killed either directly or indirectly through his various schemes and negligence. His nuclear plant has certainly exposed workers to deadly radiation. His blocking out of the sun could have resulted in deaths from cold and darkness. His various business ventures have ruined lives and potentially driven people to suicide. While we rarely see Burns directly kill anyone, his body count, when you add up all the collateral damage from his evil plans, is probably quite high. The show's treatment of death creates a strange moral landscape. Murder is wrong, but also kind of funny. Death is tragic, but also reversible depending on whether an episode is canon. Characters grieve their losses, but then seem to forget about them as soon as it's convenient. This inconsistency might just be the result of having hundreds of writers over decades working on a show with loose continuity, but it also creates a world where the value of human life seems weirdly flexible. People matter until they don't. Death is permanent until it isn't. Mourning is appropriate until the plot moves on. What makes this especially dark is how it reflects real-world numbing to violence and death. We've become so accustomed to seeing death in media that it takes increasingly extreme imagery to make us feel anything. And The Simpsons started with relatively tame violence and has gradually pushed boundaries over the years, mirroring how audiences have become desensitized to cartoon violence. The fact that a show ostensibly aimed at families now features episodes with genuine body horror and graphic death shows how far those boundaries have shifted. The final dark element is the show's occasional acknowledgement of its own immortality. Characters sometimes reference the fact that they never age, that time passes strangely, that they've been through events that should have killed them. This meta-awareness of the show's cartoon logic makes all the death and destruction feel even more meaningless. Nothing really matters because nothing can permanently change. Characters exist in a state of perpetual almost death, surviving catastrophe after catastrophe, and dying in Halloween episodes only to be resurrected by the reset button of canon. It's a kind of immortality, but it's the immortality of eternal repetition rather than eternal life. They can't truly live, but they also can't truly die, leaving them stuck in an endless cycle of violence and survival that will continue as long as the show airs. Springfield's corruption, crime, and institutional failure. Springfield, as depicted in The Simpsons, is a failed state masquerading as a normal American town. Every institution that's supposed to serve and protect the public has been so thoroughly corrupted or made incompetent that the town barely functions. The police force is a joke. The government is openly corrupt. The justice system is broken. The school system is underfunded and dysfunctional. The media lies constantly. And the citizens have largely given up on expecting anything better because they've been let down so many times. Let's start with law enforcement. Chief Wiggum and his officers represent the absolute worst of police incompetence mixed with casual corruption. Wiggum is portrayed as so fundamentally bad at his job that it's a miracle Springfield has any public safety at all. He's lazy, stupid, easily bribed, and more interested in eating donuts than catching criminals. His officers are barely better. Lou and Eddie seem somewhat competent by comparison, but they're hamstrung by working for an incompetent chief in a broken system. The police department's failures are too numerous to catalogue completely, but some highlights include regularly failing to solve crimes, letting known criminals escape, being bribed with embarrassingly small amounts of money, using excessive force on innocent people while ignoring actual threats, and showing up late to emergencies, or sometimes not showing up at all. In one episode, Wiggum and his officers join an angry mob, trying to kill the Simpsons family rather than protecting them. In another, Wiggum actively helps criminals because they offered him free food. This isn't satire taken to absurd extremes. This is a realistic depiction of corrupt police behavior dressed up in cartoon clothing. The justice system is equally broken. Springfield's courts are presided over by judges who seem to base their decisions on personal whim rather than law. Trials are conducted with minimal regard for proper procedure. Evidence is routinely mishandled or ignored. Juries are selected from a pool of people who are demonstrably too stupid or biased to serve. Lawyers like Lionel Hutz operate despite being completely incompetent and possibly not properly licensed. The whole system is a farce that occasionally produces something approximating justice purely by accident. Sideshow Bob's repeated escapes from prison illustrate this perfectly. Bob is a convicted attempted murderer who has escaped from prison multiple times to make more attempts on Bart's life. Each time he's caught and sent back, but the prison system is so poorly run that he's able to escape again and again. Nobody seems to learn from previous escapes or tighten security in any meaningful way. Springfield's law enforcement treats a serial attempted child murderer as a minor inconvenience rather than a serious threat. The political system is no better. Mayor Quimby is openly corrupt, accepting bribes, using city funds for personal benefit, and making decisions based on personal interest rather than public good. His corruption is so blatant that everyone knows about it, but he keeps getting re-elected anyway because the alternatives are somehow worse, or because he's managed to rig the system enough to stay in power. Elections in Springfield are rarely fair or honest, with voter fraud, ballot stuffing, and other irregularities being treated as normal parts of the democratic process. The town's relationship with organized crime is deeply disturbing. Fat Tony and the Springfield Mafia operate openly. Everyone knows who they are and what they do, and law enforcement seems powerless or unwilling to stop them. The mob has infiltrated various legitimate businesses, including construction, waste management, and food service. They murder people who cross them. They run illegal gambling operations. They're basically untouchable because they've either bribed the right officials or proven themselves too dangerous to oppose. The school system represents another massive institutional failure. Springfield Elementary is chronically underfunded, with deteriorating facilities, outdated textbooks, and teachers who range from burned out to actively incompetent. Principal Skinner tries his best but is hamstrung by budget constraints and a superintendent who doesn't care. Groundskeeper Willie lives in poverty despite working for the school. The cafeteria serves food that's barely edible. The building itself is falling apart, with structural problems that make it actively dangerous for students. The nuclear plant, as discussed earlier, operates with minimal oversight and routinely violates safety regulations. But what makes this especially dark is that the regulatory agencies that are supposed to prevent this kind of thing are shown to be toothless and ineffective. When Homer sends his safety report to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the plant gets temporarily shut down, but it's back in operation quickly with minimal changes. The NRC exists, but seems unable to actually enforce its own rules when confronted with someone like Burns, who has the money and political connections to resist regulation. The media actively contributes to Springfield's dysfunction. Kent Brockman and Channel 6 News regularly sensationalize stories, spread misinformation, and bow to pressure from powerful interests. Brockman himself seems more interested in his own celebrity than in actual journalism. The news programs manufacture controversies and ignore real problems. When they do report on actual issues, they do so in such a superficial and misleading way that viewers end up less informed than if they'd watched nothing. The medical system is a mixed bag. Some doctors, like Dr. Hibbert, are competent but trapped in a broken healthcare system. Others, like Dr. Nick Riviera, are dangerously incompetent and should never have been allowed to practice medicine. The Springfield General Hospital seems to provide decent care sometimes, but it's also shown to be overcrowded, underfunded, and occasionally willing to bend ethical rules. The fact that unlicensed quacks like Dr. and Nick can operate openly suggests that medical licensing and oversight in Springfield is essentially non-existent. The cumulative effect of all these institutional failures is a town that's barely functional. Crime is rampant because the police can't or won't stop it. Justice is rare because the courts are corrupt. Public services are terrible because the government is incompetent and corrupt. Education suffers because nobody wants to properly fund schools. The environment is poisoned because regulations aren't enforced. The media keeps everyone misinformed and distracted. And the citizens are trapped in this dysfunctional system with no real ability to change it. What makes this particularly dark is how realistic it all is, just exaggerated for comedic effect. Real towns do have corrupt politicians. Real police departments do fail to serve their communities. Real justice systems do fail to provide actual justice. Real schools do struggle with inadequate funding. Real regulatory agencies do get captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. The Simpsons takes these very real problems and pushes them to absurd extremes. But the underlying issues are all too familiar to anyone paying attention to how power actually works in America. The citizens of Springfield have largely accepted their lot. They protest occasionally when things get bad enough, but these protests are easily diffused or ignored. They vote but seem to understand that elections won't change anything fundamental. They complain, but don't really expect things to improve. There's a learned helplessness that pervades the town, a sense that this is just how things are and nothing can be done about it. When Homer briefly becomes smart and tries to fix the nuclear plant's safety problems, he's punished for it. The system doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to maintain the status quo that benefits the powerful at everyone else's expense. The show occasionally presents this systemic dysfunction as the natural order of things, which is perhaps the darkest element. When every institution is broken, when corruption is universal, when competence is punished and incompetence is rewarded, you start to wonder if this isn't just satire, but a kind of nihilistic acceptance of how things actually are. The Simpsons might have started as a critique of American society, but after 36 seasons, and it sometimes feels less like critique and more like documentation of societal collapse that we've all just gotten used to. The fact that we laugh at all this is telling. We laugh because it's exaggerated, because it's animated, because the cartoon format creates distance from the real suffering these failures would cause. But the laughter has a nervous edge to it sometimes, because we recognize too much of our own world in Springfield's dysfunction. The corruption, the incompetence, the institutional failure. It's all familiar enough to be uncomfortable even when it's meant to be funny. Springfield is a warning disguised as a comedy, showing us what happens when every system designed to protect people breaks down simultaneously and nobody has the power or will to fix it. The Treehouse of Horror Canon. Debate. One of the most fascinating aspects of The Simpsons' dark lore is the annual Treehouse of Horror episodes, and the question of whether these Halloween specials should be considered canon. Since the second season, The Simpsons has produced Halloween-themed anthology episodes that break from the show's normal continuity to present horror, science fiction, and fantasy stories featuring the regular characters in new and usually deadly situations. These episodes exist in a kind of narrative limbo, acknowledged by the show itself as non-canonical, but still part of the Simpsons universe in some weird way. The very first Treehouse of Horror episode aired in 1990 and set the template for what would become an annual tradition. The episode featured 3 segments: a haunted house story parodying the Amityville Horror, an alien abduction parody of To Serve Man, and a beautiful animated adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. The segments were framed as scary stories being told by Bart and Lisa in their treehouse, which is where the series gets its name. The episode was darker and more violent than typical Simpsons fare, and it was a huge hit with audiences. What makes the Treehouse episodes so important to understanding The Simpsons' dark lore is that they allow the writers to explore territory that would be completely off limits in regular episodes. Characters can die violently and graphically. The world can end. Supernatural horrors can invade Springfield. The normal rules of the show's universe can be completely suspended, or this freedom has resulted in some of the most creative and disturbing content the show has ever produced. But it's also created confusion about what counts as real in the Simpsons universe. The show itself has been inconsistent about the canon status of Treehouse episodes. Early on, there were wraparound segments that explicitly framed the stories as dreams or fiction within the show's universe. Marge would warn viewers that the episode might be too scary for children. The segments were clearly demarcated as not real, even within the fictional world of The Simpsons. But as the series has gone on, these framing devices have been dropped or become more meta and self-aware. Recent Treehouse episodes often don't bother explaining why these stories don't count. They just assume viewers understand the Halloween episodes play by different rules. The complication comes from the fact that some elements from Treehouse episodes have crossed over into the main canon. Uta Zerker, the obese German exchange student, was introduced in a Treehouse of Horror 4 segment and then became a recurring background character in regular episodes. If a character from a non-canon episode can become canon, what does that say about the barrier between these two types of stories? Can elements from Treehouse episodes be selectively imported into the main continuity? And if so, what else from those dark episodes might be real in some sense. The violence in Treehouse episodes has escalated significantly over the years. Early Halloween specials were relatively tame, and with comedy being the primary goal even when depicting scary scenarios. But recent episodes have featured genuinely disturbing imagery that pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable on network television. Characters are shown being violently killed in graphic detail. Body horror is prevalent, with characters being mutilated, transformed into monsters, or suffering fates that would be traumatic if they happened in regular episodes. The blood, gore, and visceral violence of recent Treehouse episodes would be shocking if they appeared in any other context. Season 37's Treehouse of Horror 36 was explicitly designed to be the bloodiest, most violent Halloween special yet. The writer responsible for one segment stated in interviews that he wanted to make a genuinely gruesome Halloween story, which is why we see Nelson explode and Sideshow Mel get his face ripped off by an insane Mr. Teeny. Main characters die in horrible ways. There's graphic violence and disturbing imagery that goes well beyond typical cartoon violence. The episode represents the culmination of a gradual escalation in how dark these specials can be. This raises the question, if these episodes don't count as canon, why do they matter? The answer is that they reveal something about the show and its creators' willingness to explore darkness that would be unacceptable in regular episodes. The Treehouse episodes serve as a kind of ID for The Simpsons, expressing the violent and disturbing impulses that have to be suppressed in normal episodes, where consequences matter and characters need to remain sympathetic, and they show us what the show would look like if all the normal rules were suspended, and what we see is often genuinely disturbing. The Treehouse episodes also allow for creative experimentation with animation and storytelling. Different segments have parodied everything from classic horror films to anime to modern horror hits. The animation styles shift to match the parody material, resulting in some visually striking and occasionally unsettling sequences. Homer 3, the segment where Homer enters a three-dimensional world, was groundbreaking for its time and genuinely eerie in its depiction of Homer trapped in an alien dimension. More recent segments have adapted anime styles for Death Note parodies or created future worlds buried in plastic waste. And one of the darkest aspects of Treehouse episodes is how they explore the darker potential of characters we know and love. Lisa becomes a serial killer in a Death Note parody, using her intelligence and moral righteousness to justify murder. Homer becomes an axe-wielding murderer in The Shining. Bart gets killed repeatedly by Sideshow Bob in various gruesome ways. Marge turns into various monsters or dies in horrible fashion. These segments show us versions of these characters where their worst traits are amplified to monstrous proportions or where they're simply victims of cosmic horror beyond their control. The debate about canon also touches on deeper questions about what The Simpsons actually is as a show. If the Halloween episodes don't count, and does that mean the show is fundamentally optimistic and any genuinely dark content gets quarantined to special episodes? Or is the division between canon and non-canon itself artificial, with the Treehouse episodes revealing truths about these characters and their world that regular episodes can only hint at? When we see Homer capable of extreme violence in a Halloween episode, are we seeing something that was always there but suppressed by the needs of episodic television? The Treehouse episodes also comment on the show itself in ways that can be unsettling. One recent segment imagined The Simpsons as robots, created by a company to sell merchandise and keep audiences entertained. The segment showed Homer and other characters malfunctioning, revealing the mechanical nature underneath their seemingly organic existence. In this meta-commentary on the show's status as intellectual property that exists primarily to generate profit is simultaneously clever satire and genuinely creepy existential horror for the characters themselves. What makes the Treehouse episodes particularly important to The Simpsons' dark lore is that they reveal the full range of what's possible within this fictional universe. They show us that Springfield can be destroyed, that the characters can all die, that reality itself can break down or transform into something nightmarish. Regular episodes have to maintain some semblance of normalcy and restore the status quo by the end. But Treehouse episodes can end with everyone dead, or the world completely transformed. This possibility space is always there, lurking in the background of regular episodes, reminding us that things could be much worse. The non-canonical nature of these episodes also creates a strange kind of narrative freedom that makes them emotionally weightier than you might expect. Because they don't count, the writers can take genuine emotional risks. Characters can experience real loss, real horror, real transformation. The fact that it will all be reset doesn't make the experience less affecting in the moment. In some ways, the Treehouse episodes are more honest about the nature of the show than regular episodes are. They acknowledge that The Simpsons is a construct, that the characters exist in a state of perpetual, almost change, and that the only place real transformation can happen is in these special episodes that explicitly don't matter. The final element worth considering is what it means that The Simpsons' darkest content is confined to these Halloween specials. On one hand, it shows the writers understand there are boundaries that shouldn't be crossed in regular episodes. On the other, it suggests a desire to cross those boundaries that can only be satisfied in this quarantine space where normal rules don't apply. The Treehouse episodes are a pressure valve, letting out the darkness that builds up over the course of a season of regular episodes. But they're also a glimpse into an alternate version of The Simpsons, where the darkness is allowed to run free, where characters really can die and stay dead, where the universe is genuinely hostile and uncaring, and where the cheerful cartoon veneer gets stripped away to reveal something much more disturbing underneath. Mr. and Burns, the immortal monster. Charles Montgomery Burns is perhaps the single darkest element in all of The Simpsons, and that's saying something given how much darkness we've already discussed. Burns isn't just a villain or an antagonist. He's a walking embodiment of evil so pure and so persistent that he's literally too corrupt to die. His age alone is disturbing. He's somewhere around 156 years old, according to various episodes, though some suggest he's even older. He claims to have been born in Pangaea in one episode, which would make him impossibly ancient. The exact number doesn't matter as much as the implication. Burns has been alive for an impossibly long time, and he's used that time to perfect the art of making others suffer. The explanation for Burns' longevity is itself deeply disturbing. In the episode The Mansion Family, doctors at the Mayo Clinic discover that Burns has contracted every disease known to medical science, plus several that were discovered during his examination. But these diseases haven't killed him. Instead, they've achieved a kind of horrific equilibrium that doctors call Three Stooges syndrome. The diseases are all trying to attack his body simultaneously, but they're getting in each other's way, cancelling out and keeping him alive through sheer biological impossibility. A doctor warns him that even a slight breeze could upset this balance and kill him, but Burns misinterprets this as meaning he's invincible. This medical nightmare makes Burns' survival into something deeply unnatural. He should be dead 1,000 times over, but the sheer concentration of diseases in his body has created a kind of stasis. He's less a living being and more a walking biological catastrophe that somehow achieved consciousness. The fact that this makes him feel invulnerable rather than terrified shows how completely divorced from normal human emotions he is. Any sane person would be horrified to learn they're kept alive only by the mutual interference of their countless diseases. Burns sees it as proof of his superiority. Burns also undergoes regular longevity treatments that are described in genuinely horrifying terms. Every week, he receives a spinal adjustment, eye drop dilation, painkiller injection, vocal cord scraping, and other procedures designed to cheat death for another 7 days. After these treatments, and he's described as twisted and disoriented, and has to be given a booster shot just to return to his normal state of being barely alive. The implication is that Burns' continued existence requires constant medical intervention that would be unendurable for a normal person. He's willing to undergo weekly torture just to keep living, which speaks to his pathological fear of death, despite his seemingly invincible medical status. The evil acts Burns has committed over his long life are too numerous to catalogue completely, but some highlights demonstrate just how monstrous this character really is. He's blocked out the sun to force Springfield to buy more electricity from his plant. He's dumped nuclear waste at locations where children play, causing them to lose their hair from radiation exposure. He's stolen oil from Springfield Elementary, destroying their newfound wealth. He's tried to have puppies made into clothing in a direct Cruella de Vil homage. He's attempted to kill Abe Simpson and Bart to gain access to stolen art. He's tried to murder his own mother. The list goes on and on. Burns' relationship with his employees is characterized by casual cruelty that borders on the sociopathic. He literally cannot remember Homer's name despite decades of interactions, suggesting he sees his workers as interchangeable and beneath his notice. He routinely endangers their lives through negligent safety practices at the plant. When Homer was in a coma, Burns tried to pull the plug to avoid paying his health insurance. He's made employees do humiliating things for small amounts of money. In one particularly dark example, Burns forced Homer to undergo various degrading acts for cash, one of which resulted in Homer being raped by a panda. This is treated as comedy, but the underlying reality is that Burns deliberately put his employee in a situation that resulted in sexual assault. The environmental crimes Burns commits are genocidal in scope. His nuclear plant poisons the air, water, and soil around Springfield. Three-eyed fish and other mutated creatures are the visible evidence of genetic damage that's probably affecting the entire ecosystem. He's dumped radioactive waste in locations where it will do maximum damage to public health. When Springfield was facing environmental regulations, he joined the mob trying to kill the Simpson family, rather than accept responsibility for his pollution. His approach to environmental protection is to fight against it with every resource at his disposal, viewing clean air and water as inconveniences that interfere with his profits. Burns' blocking of the sun in Who Shot Mr. Burns represents his evil taken to its logical extreme. Unable to accept that there are limits to his power, he constructed a device to literally blot out the sun, plunging Springfield into darkness and cold to force residents to use more of his electricity. This is supervillain behavior that transcends typical corporate malfeasance and enters into actively hostile relationship with nature itself. He's willing to destroy the town's quality of life completely just to increase his already massive wealth. The fact that someone eventually shot him for this plan seems like remarkably restrained given how catastrophic his scheme was. Throughout his long life, Burns has been involved in numerous violent incidents. He hit Bart with his car and then offered the child a nickel and a penny as compensation, showing no remorse for nearly killing a kid. He's been part of the Flying Hellfish Squadron in World War II, where he tried to cheat his fellow soldiers out of their share of stolen art. He's arranged for competitors to be killed. He's released his hounds on people who annoyed him. He's kept a gun in his office and threatened to use it. His entire existence is marred by violence, both the kind he directly perpetrates and the kind his business practices make inevitable. What makes Burns particularly terrifying is his complete lack of redemption. The show occasionally tries to humanize him by showing his childhood teddy bear Bobo, or suggesting he was innocent once before the world made him cruel. But these moments of vulnerability are fleeting and don't actually change his behavior. Burns always returns to being the same sadistic, greedy monster he's always been. There's no character growth, no moral awakening, no moment where he truly repents for his evil. He's essentially static in his evil, a constant force of destruction that persists through the decades without meaningful change. His treatment of Smithers, the one person who seems genuinely loyal to him, reveals the hollowness at Burns' core. Smithers worships Burns and would do anything for him, but Burns treats him with casual contempt. He forgets Smithers' name sometimes, despite their close working relationship. He denies Smithers raises and promotions despite decades of loyal service. He's completely oblivious to Smithers' romantic feelings for him. The one person in the world who actually cares about Burns is rewarded with indifference and occasional cruelty. It's a perfect demonstration of how Burns is incapable of genuine human connection. The fact that Burns is responsible for Homer's current state of stupidity adds another layer of darkness to his character. As discussed earlier, Burns was indirectly responsible for Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, having to leave her family and go on the run. This abandonment caused deep trauma in young Homer that led to him developing harmful coping mechanisms, including sticking crayons up his nose. So Burns's corporate malfeasance didn't just poison Springfield's environment. It directly caused Homer's brain damage by creating the circumstances that led to Mona's departure and Homer's subsequent psychological distress. Burns has shaped the entire trajectory of the Simpson family without ever knowing or caring about it. Burns represents capitalism taken to its absolute worst extreme. He's accumulated vast wealth and uses it purely to accumulate more wealth and power without any concern for how it affects others. His business model is built on poisoning the environment, exploiting workers, bribing officials, and fighting against any regulation that might limit his profits. He treats other people as objects to be used and discarded as needed. His lack of empathy extends to everyone, including children, the elderly, and even his own employees. He's what you get when someone has unlimited resources, unlimited time, and absolutely no moral constraints on their behavior. The most disturbing thing about Burns might be how the show treats him as a mostly acceptable part of Springfield's landscape. He's an antagonist, yes, but he's not really opposed with any effectiveness. He continues to run his dangerous plant. He continues to live in luxury while his workers struggle. He continues to plot schemes that hurt people. And life just goes on because nobody has the power to stop him. He's too rich, too well connected, and too willing to use violence to be challenged by normal people working through normal institutions. The system is designed to protect people like Burns, not to hold them accountable. Burns is essentially a monster who's discovered how to live forever, and he's using that immortality to make the world worse for everyone else. He's the living embodiment of the idea that the rich and powerful operate by different rules than everyone else. His continued existence is a standing indictment of a society that allows people like him to accumulate power without accountability. And the fact that he's played for laughs most of the time doesn't make him any less horrifying when you actually think about what his character represents and what he's done over his impossibly long life. Moe's depression and suicide attempts. Moe Szyslak might be the single most tragic character in The Simpsons, and the show's treatment of his depression and repeated suicide attempts represents some of the darkest content the series has ever produced. Moe is characterized by his violent temper, poor self-esteem, and what the show explicitly describes as suicidal tendencies. Unlike Burns' evil or Homer's stupidity, Moe's darkness comes from genuine mental illness and crushing loneliness. His pain is real in a way that transcends cartoon logic, and the show mines that pain for dark comedy with a consistency that's genuinely disturbing. The most famous revelation about Moe's mental state is that he has an annual Christmas tradition of attempting suicide. This isn't speculation or fan theory. The show explicitly states that Moe attempts to kill himself every Christmas. His attempts are consistently unsuccessful, often in comedically improbable ways. Jumping out of a plane only to land on a hot air balloon, for example. The fact that these attempts fail doesn't make them less serious. Moe genuinely wants to die every year, and every year something prevents him from succeeding. That's not funny. That's a man trapped in a cycle of despair who's only alive because of luck and circumstance, rather than because he wants to be. The Christmas timing makes his suicide attempts even darker. Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy, family, and connection. For Moe, it's apparently so unbearable that he'd rather be dead. The holiday must remind him of everything he lacks: love, family, happiness, hope. While other people are celebrating with loved ones, Moe is alone in his dingy bar, planning his next attempt to end his life. The annual nature of these attempts suggests this isn't impulsive depression, but something chronic and deeply rooted in his existence. And the most graphic depiction of Moe's suicidal ideation comes in the season 24 episode Whiskey Business. The episode opens with Moe standing on a stool with a noose around his neck, genuinely preparing to hang himself. He's not joking. He's not staging something for attention. He's actually trying to commit suicide in his bar storage room. Homer, Lenny, and Carl arrive just in time, having heard a noise. Moe accidentally trips over the stool and falls, and they rush in to perform CPR, not knowing whether he's alive or dead. When Moe wakes up, he's touched that they cared enough to try to save him. This scene is played surprisingly straight, given The Simpsons' typical tone. There's no winking at the camera, no undercutting the seriousness with a quick joke. Moe was genuinely about to kill himself. And the show lets that moment sit with appropriate weight. The fact that his friends care about him enough to save his life gives Moe a temporary reprieve from his depression. But the episode makes it clear this isn't a permanent solution. By the end, Moe is back to his usual miserable self, and the noose is still hanging in his office as a grim reminder of how close he came to using it. In season 14's Mo Baby Blues, Moe's suicide attempt is what sets the plot in motion. Feeling lonely and rejected, Moe goes to the Springfield Bridge with the intention of jumping off. His plan is interrupted when Maggie Simpson flies through the air after her car seat breaks and lands in his arms just as he's about to jump. Moe accidentally saves Maggie's life while attempting to end his own, and the townspeople declare him a hero. are Maggie's kiss and the positive attention give Mo a reason to live, at least temporarily. He forms an obsessive bond with Maggie that gives his life meaning for a while, until that relationship becomes unhealthy in its own way. The episode reveals one of the darkest aspects of Mo's character, his self-awareness about his condition. Chief Wiggum kicks Mo out of a public event because he's had his feelings hurt so many times, once more won't make a difference. This is described as standard practice, using Mo's emotional resilience, really his emotional numbness from repeated trauma, as justification for treating him poorly. The assumption is that Mo is so used to rejection and pain that one more instance won't matter. But it does matter. This final rejection is what pushes Mo to attempt suicide. The accumulated weight of being treated as acceptable collateral damage throughout his life becomes too much to bear. Mo's suicide hotline has blocked his number because he calls so frequently. Think about what that means. A service designed specifically to help people in suicidal crisis has decided that Mo is too much trouble and blocked him from accessing help. He's so chronically suicidal that even the suicide prevention hotline gave up on him. This is simultaneously darkly comic and genuinely horrifying. The one institutional support designed to help people like Mo has deemed him unsavable and cut him off. He's been officially abandoned by the mental health support system. Throughout the series, Mo makes casual references to his various suicide attempts and methods. He mentions having a gun, pills, various implements for hanging, and other tools of self-destruction readily available. His bar is essentially a suicide waiting to happen, filled with weapons and methods he could use at any moment. The fact that he hasn't succeeded is presented as either luck or incompetence, rather than as him genuinely choosing to live. Mo exists in a constant state of passive suicidal ideation, where death is always an option he's actively considering. The roots of Mo's depression are explored throughout the series. He's hideous by conventional standards, with even the show itself repeatedly commenting on how ugly he is. He's lonely, with no romantic prospects and few genuine friends. His business is failing most of the time. He's been subjected to Bart's prank calls for years, which humiliate him regularly. He has no family that's ever mentioned. His life lacks meaning, connection, and hope. These aren't just character flaws or bad luck. They're systematic sources of suffering that combine to create an existence that Mo apparently finds unbearable. What makes the show's treatment of Mo particularly dark is how his suicidal tendencies are used as recurring jokes. We're supposed to laugh at Mo's failed suicide attempts. We're supposed to find it funny that he's so depressed he wants to die every Christmas. We're supposed to chuckle at references to his gun, his noose, his pills. The show takes genuine mental illness and suffering and mines it for comedy, which raises uncomfortable questions about what we're really laughing at. Are we laughing at the absurdity of the situations? Or are we laughing at a mentally ill person's suffering? The season 36 finale included a flash-forward segment showing potential futures for Springfield characters. In one future, there's a gravestone for Mo, suggesting he eventually succeeded in killing himself. The gravestone exists in a possible future, not a confirmed one, but its inclusion in the episode suggests that the writers understand where Mo's character trajectory is heading. After decades of depression and suicide attempts, at least one possible ending for Mo is that he finally goes through with it. That's an incredibly dark acknowledgement of the character's fundamental hopelessness. The show occasionally tries to give Mo moments of happiness or purpose. His relationship with Maggie in Mo Baby Blues gives him temporary meaning. His brief business success in Whiskey Business lifts his spirits before inevitably falling apart. Various romantic interests come and go, none of them lasting. These moments of light make the returns to darkness even more tragic, because they show Mo is capable of happiness. He can experience joy, love, purpose, and meaning. But these experiences never last, and Mo always ends up back in his dingy bar, alone and miserable, contemplating suicide again. The most disturbing element of Mo's storyline is how little help he receives. His friends care about him on some level, but they don't seem to recognize or address the severity of his mental illness. They save him when he's actively trying to die, but they don't get him into therapy or treatment. And they comfort him temporarily, but don't provide the sustained support he'd need to actually improve his mental health. Mo is left to cope with severe depression, suicidal ideation, and crushing loneliness largely on his own, with only occasional interventions when things get critical enough that his friends can't ignore them. Mo represents how mental illness is stigmatized and misunderstood even by well-meaning people. His friends know he's depressed, but they treat it as just part of who Mo is, rather than as a serious medical condition that needs treatment. The show uses his depression as a character trait for comedy, rather than exploring it as a genuine health crisis. This mirrors how real people with mental illness are often expected to just cope with their conditions while others make jokes about their suffering. And Mo is the sad clown, and everyone's too comfortable with that role to question whether maybe the clown needs help rather than laughter. The final dark element is how Mo's character has evolved over the show's run. Early Mo was rough and unpleasant, but not explicitly suicidal. As the series progressed, his depression and suicidal tendencies became more prominent character traits. This suggests either that the writers decided to make Mo darker over time, or that they're simply making explicit what was always implied by his character. Either way, we're watching a character descend deeper into depression over literal decades, with no real hope of recovery or improvement. Mo is trapped in his pain, just as surely as the other characters are trapped in their eternal present, doomed to repeat the same cycles of despair without the possibility of genuine healing or growth. The darker side of side characters, while we've focused on the main family and major characters like Burns and Mo, Springfield is full of side characters whose backstories and behavior contain their own special brands of darkness. These characters might not get as much screen time, but their brief appearances often reveal disturbing truths about the world they inhabit and the traumas that have shaped them. Let's explore some of the darker elements lurking in Springfield's supporting cast. Sideshow Bob is perhaps the most obviously dark side character, being a sophisticated, cultured man who's devoted his life to murdering a child. Bob was originally Krusty's sidekick before being sent to prison for framing Krusty for armed robbery. After his release, he became obsessed with killing Bart Simpson, the child who exposed his crime. This obsession has defined Bob's existence for decades of showtime, with Bob escaping from prison repeatedly to make new attempts on Bart's life. The show plays this for comedy, but step back and think about it. We're watching an intelligent adult stalk, terrorize, and attempt to murder a 10-year-old boy, and this is supposed to be entertaining. What makes Bob particularly disturbing is his self-awareness about how monstrous his behavior is. He's not insane in the traditional sense. He knows exactly what he's doing and why it's wrong. He simply doesn't care. His hatred of Bart has consumed him to the point where he's willing to throw away his freedom, his talent, and any chance at a normal life just for the satisfaction of killing this child. In Treehouse of Horror episodes, Bob actually succeeds multiple times, killing Bart in various gruesome ways and then reviving him just to kill him again. The pleasure Bob takes in Bart's suffering goes beyond mere revenge into sadistic territory. Barney Gumble represents another kind of darkness, the tragedy of wasted potential destroyed by addiction. Barney was once a promising student with a bright future ahead of him. Homer introduced him to beer, and Barney became an immediate alcoholic, throwing away his scholarships and his dreams. The show has depicted Barney's alcoholism in increasingly disturbing ways over the years. He's homeless sometimes. He's done degrading things for alcohol. He's suffered health problems from his drinking. And when he briefly gets sober, we see glimpses of the intelligent, talented person he could have been, which makes his returns to alcoholism even more tragic. The show's treatment of Barney's alcoholism has been inconsistent and often troubling. Early episodes played his drinking purely for laughs, with Barney's slurred speech and falls being used as slapstick comedy. Later episodes tried to take it more seriously, showing the real damage alcoholism causes and even having Barney get sober. But the show couldn't commit to having him stay sober, apparently finding Barney more useful as comic relief drunk than as a recovering alcoholic. This sends a pretty dark message about how the show views addiction as a personality trait that's funny rather than a disease that destroys lives. Ned Flanders, everyone's favorite religious neighbor, has his own dark elements, despite being genuinely kind most of the time. Ned lost his wife Maud in a random accident, leaving him a widower trying to raise 2 children alone. The show dealt with this surprisingly seriously at first, showing Ned's grief and struggle. But eventually, Ned's loss became just another element of his character, rather than an ongoing source of pain. His faith presumably helps him cope, but there's something deeply sad about Ned's forced cheerfulness in the face of genuine tragedy. He's had to bury his wife, deal with hostile neighbors, and maintain his faith despite constant tests, and he does it all with a smile that sometimes feels more desperate than genuine. The Flanders boys, Rod and Todd, are being raised in such a restrictive religious environment that it borders on abuse. They're not allowed to consume most popular culture. They're taught to fear and reject anything remotely secular. They're being indoctrinated into a very specific worldview that will make it difficult for them to function in the wider world. Ned means well, but his form of parenting is creating children who will struggle with the real world once they're adults. The show occasionally hints at this, showing the boys' complete naivete and inability to handle situations their upbringing didn't prepare them for. Comic Book Guy represents another kind of tragedy. The person who's so isolated and specialized in their interests that they've lost the ability to connect with others. He's morbidly obese, probably due to depression and poor lifestyle choices. He's arrogant and condescending as a defense mechanism against his own deep insecurities. He runs a comic book shop that seems to barely make any money. He's constantly mocked for being a stereotypical nerd, and while he tries to project superiority, you can see the pain underneath. Comic Book Guy is lonely, unhealthy, and trapped in a life that's only satisfying on the most superficial level. He's found a niche, but hasn't found genuine happiness or connection. Snake is a career criminal whose crimes include armed robbery, grand theft auto, and occasional murder. The show treats him as a relatively sympathetic character sometimes, but he's genuinely dangerous and has hurt people. His criminal lifestyle means he's in and out of prison constantly, and he seems unable or unwilling to reform, and Snake represents how Springfield has normalized crime, to the point where armed robbery is just part of the local color, rather than a serious social problem that should be addressed. Groundskeeper Willie has one of the darkest backstories of any side character. He's a Scottish immigrant who works at the elementary school for what appears to be poverty wages. He lives in a shack with minimal amenities. He's been subjected to horrible treatment, including being set on fire while the children and teachers watched and did nothing. In Treehouse of Horror episodes, Willie is repeatedly killed, getting an axe to the back in 3 different segments of Treehouse of Horror 5. While this is played for laughs in the context of a Halloween special, and it also reflects how Willie is consistently treated as disposable and less worthy of concern than other characters. Willie's anger and occasional violence make more sense when you consider his circumstances. He's desperately poor, stuck in a dead-end job, isolated by his accent and national origin, and treated with casual contempt by almost everyone around him. His explosive rages aren't just a character quirk. They're the reaction of someone who's been pushed to his limit by years of exploitation and disrespect. Willie represents how immigrants and working-class people are often treated in America as useful labor that doesn't deserve dignity or fair compensation. Professor Frink represents the mad scientist archetype, but there's real tragedy in his character too, where he's brilliant but socially awkward to the point where he struggles to connect with others. His inventions are routinely ignored or misused. He seeks validation through his work, but rarely receives it. His father's death and various attempts to resurrect him show Frink dealing with grief through science, trying to solve emotional problems with technical solutions that can never really work. Frink is another example of someone who's found their niche, but not genuine happiness or fulfillment. Hans Mollerman is perhaps the most consistently abused character in the entire show. He's constantly being hurt, nearly killed, or humiliated in ways that would be tragic if the show dwelled on them. He's very old, but seems to have nobody who cares about him. He lives alone, drives despite being nearly blind, and regularly finds himself in dangerous situations that result in injury. The show uses him as a punching bag for physical comedy, but there's something genuinely sad about a character whose entire existence seems to be suffering one indignity after another with no relief or respite. The side characters of Springfield collectively paint a picture of a town full of damaged, struggling people who found ways to cope with lives that range from disappointing to actively tragic. Nearly everyone has trauma, addiction, mental illness, or other serious problems that affect their daily existence. And nearly everyone is just trying to get through each day without addressing the underlying issues that make their lives difficult. The show mines all of this pain for comedy, which works because we understand these are cartoon characters who will reset by next episode. But it also creates a vision of American life that's surprisingly dark when you add up all the individual tragedies and realize almost nobody in Springfield is genuinely happy or healthy. Reality breaks and meta-horror. One of the most unsettling aspects of The Simpsons comes from its occasional willingness to break the fourth wall, or acknowledge its own fictional nature. These moments of meta-awareness create a kind of existential horror for the characters, who are sometimes forced to confront the fact that they exist purely for our entertainment. While these reality-breaking moments are usually played for laughs, they occasionally veer into genuinely disturbing territory that makes you question the nature of the show's universe. The most famous reality break is probably Homer 3, the groundbreaking segment from Treehouse of Horror 6. In this segment, Homer hides from his sisters-in-law by squeezing through a portal behind a bookcase and entering a three-dimensional world. The animation shifts from the show's normal 2D style to early CGI, creating a genuinely alien environment. Homer is trapped in this dimension, struggling to escape as the plane of existence collapses around him. The segment ends with Homer falling through the floor and disappearing, only to emerge in what appears to be our real world, a live-action Los Angeles where a confused Homer wanders into an erotic cake store. What makes Homer 3 particularly unsettling is how it depicts Homer experiencing genuine terror and confusion as the rules of reality change around him, and he doesn't understand where he is or how to escape. The 3D environment is hostile and incomprehensible to him. When he starts to disintegrate as the dimension collapses, it looks genuinely painful and frightening. This isn't cartoon violence with no consequences. This is a character facing existential annihilation in a way that feels real despite the obviously artificial animation. The shift to live action at the end adds another layer of strangeness, suggesting Homer has escaped his fictional world and entered ours, though this thread is never followed up on. Other Treehouse of Horror episodes have played with reality in disturbing ways. One segment showed the Simpsons as robots created by a corporation to sell merchandise and generate profit. We see Homer and other characters malfunctioning, revealing the mechanical nature underneath their seemingly organic exteriors. The segment is full of Simpsons Easter eggs and references, overwhelming viewers with the show's self-awareness about its own status as intellectual property. This meta-commentary becomes genuinely creepy when you consider what it means for the characters themselves. They're literally manufactured products who exist only to generate money for their creators. In regular episodes, the show occasionally acknowledges that the characters are aware they're on television. Characters sometimes look directly at the camera or comment on the show itself. These fourth wall breaks are usually quick jokes rather than sustained examination of what it means to be a fictional character, but they accumulate over time to create an underlying sense that the characters have some level of awareness about their artificial nature. They know they're being watched. They know their lives are structured around episode formats and seasonal patterns. They know, on some level, that they're not real. The couch gags, those brief sequences at the start of each episode showing the family sitting on the couch, have become increasingly surreal and sometimes disturbing over the years. Some couch gags feature body horror, with the family morphing into grotesque shapes. Others show the family dying or being replaced by other beings. One famous couch gag was animated by guest artists in styles ranging from crude MS paint drawings to sophisticated fine art, emphasizing how the characters can be rendered in infinite ways by different creators. And another showed the family as animals, robots, and other non-human entities, suggesting they're more like archetypes or symbols than consistent beings. The show has also occasionally played with time in ways that create existential dread. Characters sometimes reference how long the show has been on the air, or comment on events from previous seasons. They acknowledge that time passes strangely in Springfield, where they never age despite decades passing in the real world. This awareness of their own temporal stasis is occasionally played for horror rather than comedy, with characters realizing they're trapped in an eternal present they can never escape. In one particularly dark moment, characters have discussed the fact that they've been through events that should have killed them or changed them fundamentally, but they always return to their starting positions. This awareness of the show's reset button becomes a kind of curse. They can experience growth, change, even death. But it never really matters because next week, they'll be back to normal. They're trapped in an infinite loop of almost growth, forever approaching but never achieving genuine transformation or resolution. The show has occasionally depicted what happens when characters try to break free from their roles. Episodes about characters attempting to change their lives or escape Springfield usually end with them being pulled back by circumstances or their own limitations. The message seems to be that change is impossible within the structure of the show, and characters who try to change are fighting against the fundamental nature of their existence. This creates a kind of deterministic horror, where free will is an illusion, and everyone is locked into their assigned roles for eternity. The Halloween episode's non-canonical status creates its own meta-horror. Characters can die, experience terrible things, or undergo fundamental transformations in these episodes. But it doesn't count. They exist in a liminal space where the normal rules don't apply. But this freedom comes at the cost of meaninglessness. Nothing that happens in these episodes matters, which means any growth, development, or change the character's experience is ultimately erased. They're given the illusion of possibility only to have it snatched away when the episode ends. Some episodes have shown characters aware that they're following scripts or storylines. They've commented on the episode's plot as it unfolds, or acknowledged that certain events are happening because the writers needed them to happen. This level of meta-awareness is usually played for quick laughs, but it raises disturbing questions about the character's agency. If they know they're following scripts, are they really making choices? Or are they just consciously acting out predetermined narratives they have no power to change? The most philosophically disturbing element might be the show's acknowledgement that it exists primarily as a product. The Simpsons is one of the most merchandised properties in television history. The characters appear on everything from t-shirts to video games to theme park attractions. The show itself has commented on this merchandising, showing characters aware that their likenesses are being used to sell products. This awareness of their own commodification adds another layer of horror to their existence. They're not just trapped in narrative loops. They're also being endlessly reproduced and sold in various forms without their consent or control. The reality breaks in. The Simpsons create a unique kind of existential dread that's specific to fiction. The characters are trapped by the limitations of their medium, their creators, and their audience's expectations. They can sometimes see the bars of their cage, which makes the cage feel even more constrictive. The show occasionally lets them glimpse what lies beyond their fictional universe, but they can never truly escape it. They're condemned to eternal existence within the bounds of their animated world, are forever aware on some level that they're constructs rather than real beings, and that awareness is its own special kind of hell. Simpsons' predictions and real-world darkness. Over its 36 seasons, The Simpsons has gained a reputation for predicting the future with an accuracy that sometimes seems eerie. But when you examine these predictions more closely, many of them are less about prophetic ability and more about dark social commentary that unfortunately came true. The show's writers weren't seeing the future through some mystical power. They were warning us about where current trends were heading, and we didn't listen. The fact that so many of these predictions have come true says something disturbing about our world and our collective inability or unwillingness to learn from satire. The most famous prediction is probably Donald Trump's presidency. In the 2000 episode Bart to the Future, Lisa mentions inheriting quite a budget crunch from President Trump. 16 years before it happened in reality, The Simpsons depicted Trump as president, treating it as a cautionary tale about how American politics could descend to electing a celebrity with no government experience. The episode presented Trump's presidency as a worst-case scenario, something so absurd that it could only happen in a future gone horribly wrong. When it actually came to pass, the prediction felt less clever and more like a dark omen that went unheeded. The show predicted Trump's 2024 run as well, in a 2015 short called Trumptastic Voyage. A producer shared the image on social media when Trump announced his third campaign, and complete with a Trump 2024 sign visible in the animation. The fact that the show correctly predicted Trump would run again suggests the writers understood the trajectory of American politics better than most political analysts. What looked like absurdist comedy in 2015 became reality in 2024, proving that The Simpsons' darkest predictions about American democracy were actually understating the problem. Even the imagery around Trump's presidency was eerily accurate. Lisa appears as president wearing a purple pantsuit and pearls that closely resembles what Vice President Kamala Harris wore to the 2021 inaugural. While this might have been coincidence or a reference to Hillary Clinton's power suits, the visual parallel added another layer to the show's apparent prescience about American politics, and the show kept imagining futures where American democracy was strained or broken, and reality kept following its imagination. The predictions extend far beyond politics. The show depicted a three-eyed fish near a nuclear power plant in 1990. In 2011, a three-eyed fish was discovered near a nuclear facility in Cordoba, Argentina. While the exact details didn't match perfectly, the core prediction about nuclear contamination causing visible mutations in local wildlife proved accurate. This wasn't just a lucky guess. It was the show's environmental commentary coming true in the most literal way possible. The Simpsons predicted autocorrect and smartwatches decades before they became commonplace. They showed horse meat being served as beef before the 2013 horse meat scandal in Europe. They depicted Greece experiencing economic crisis and being put on eBay before the actual Greek debt crisis. They showed FIFA corruption before the 2015 arrests of FIFA officials. They predicted Disney buying 20th Century Fox over 20 years before the actual acquisition. They showed Siegfried and Roy being attacked by their tiger years before it happened. The list goes on and on. What makes these predictions particularly dark is that many of them aren't really predictions at all. They're observations about existing problems that hadn't blown up yet. When the show depicted mass surveillance by the NSA, they weren't predicting the future. They were commenting on existing government surveillance that would be confirmed by Edward Snowden's leaks years later. When they showed corporations behaving badly or environmental disasters, they weren't imagining new problems. They were exaggerating current trends to absurd extremes that then became reality. The fact that The Simpsons' satire keeps coming true suggests we're living in a world where reality has become indistinguishable from dark comedy. The show was meant to be a warning, showing us exaggerated versions of our worst tendencies. Instead, we took it as a roadmap, allowing the very problems the show was criticizing to get worse until they matched or exceeded the satirical versions. The Simpsons has become less a work of fiction and more a documentary about social decay that we're watching in slow motion. Some predictions are darker because of what they say about our collective priorities. The show depicted AI and automation replacing workers, which is now happening across multiple industries. They showed people becoming addicted to technology and losing the ability to interact face-to-face, which describes much of modern social media culture. They depicted polarization and breakdown of shared reality, which characterizes current political discourse. These weren't random guesses. They were the logical endpoints of trends that were already visible to anyone paying attention. The prediction about a global pandemic in margin chains from 1993 became particularly eerie during COVID-19. The episode shows a virus from Asia spreading globally, causing panic and social breakdown. While the details are different, the broad strokes of a pandemic causing economic and social disruption proved accurate. The episode even shows people hoarding supplies and fighting over resources, which happened during the early pandemic. On what seemed like absurdist comedy in 1993, became a horrifyingly accurate depiction of how society responds to disease outbreaks. The show's predictions about climate change and environmental catastrophe have been consistently accurate and consistently ignored. Episodes showing environmental disasters, extreme weather, and ecological collapse were meant to warn us about where we were heading. Instead, they've become documentation of where we've already arrived. The fact that Springfield is constantly dealing with environmental crises caused by corporate negligence mirrors how real communities deal with pollution, contamination, and ecological destruction in the name of profit. What makes these predictions genuinely dark is their fatalistic quality. The show keeps warning us about problems, and we keep letting those problems come to pass anyway. It's like watching someone repeatedly tell you not to touch a hot stove while you keep touching it and burning yourself. The Simpsons has been screaming warnings about corruption, environmental destruction, political dysfunction, corporate malfeasance, and social breakdown for over 3 decades. And we've responded by allowing all of these problems to get worse. The mathematical improbability of this many predictions coming true suggests something deeper than coincidence. Either the show's writers have genuine insight into social trends and where they lead, or we're trapped in a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where satirical predictions become blueprints for reality. Perhaps there's a feedback loop where The Simpsons shows us a dark future. We collectively shrug and allow it to happen, and then we act surprised when the prediction comes true. We've normalized the dark reality the show was warning us about. The predictions have become a meme unto themselves, with people constantly searching for new examples of the show predicting current events. But this mimetic quality obscures the genuinely unsettling nature of what's happening. We've turned our society's descent into a Simpsons episode into a source of ironic detachment, rather than a call to action. The Simpsons predicted this becomes a punchline instead of a wake-up call. We're laughing at our own dystopia, rather than trying to prevent it. Some predictions haven't come true yet, but feel inevitable given current trends. Future episodes showing environmental catastrophe, political instability, or social breakdown don't feel like far-fetched fiction anymore. They feel like previews of coming attractions. The show has created multiple possible futures for Springfield, many of them dark, and we seem determined to make those dark futures our reality. Every time another prediction comes true, we're confirming that The Simpsons' darkest visions of America were accurate. The most disturbing prediction might be the show's consistent depiction of institutional failure and societal decline that we've discussed throughout this video. The Simpsons showed us a world where every institution meant to protect people has failed, where corruption is normal, where environmental catastrophe is accepted, where violence and death are treated casually, where the rich exploit the poor with impunity, and where people are too broken or beaten down to effectively resist. That wasn't really a prediction about the future. It was commentary about the present that we're only now fully recognizing as accurate. The Simpsons has been documenting American decline for 36 years, and we've been laughing because it felt too absurd to be real. but it was never absurd. It was always just slightly exaggerated reality. And as reality has gotten worse, the exaggeration has become smaller until there's barely any distance between Springfield and our actual world. Conclusion. We've spent the last hour and a half exploring the dark underbelly of America's favorite animated family, and what we've found is genuinely disturbing. From Homer's brain damage to Moe's suicide attempts, from Mr. Burns' immortal evil to Springfield's systemic collapse, and from casual attitudes toward death to reality-breaking horror, The Simpsons has been showing us a vision of America that's far darker than most viewers realize. What started as sharp social satire has evolved into something closer to documentation of societal decay, with the show's darkest predictions and commentary proving accurate with alarming frequency. The genius of The Simpsons has always been its ability to hide sophisticated, often disturbing commentary behind the cartoon format. The bright yellow characters and silly voices make it easy to forget that we're watching stories about brain damage, depression, environmental catastrophe, institutional failure, and existential dread. We laugh because it's animation, because these are characters who reset by next episode, because the problems are exaggerated to absurd proportions. But the laughter has a nervous quality to it sometimes, because we recognize too much of our own world in Springfield's dysfunction. The show has given us some of the greatest comedy in television history. It's also given us content that would be deeply disturbing if we thought about it too carefully, which is exactly what we've been doing throughout this video. We've examined the implications of Homer's crayon, the tragedy of Moe's annual suicide attempts, the horror of Burns' evil and immortality, the casual approach to death and violence, the complete failure of every public institution, and the meta-horror of characters who sometimes realize they're trapped in an eternal present from which there's no escape. This is heavy stuff disguised as family entertainment. But here's the thing. We still love The Simpsons, despite, or perhaps because of, this darkness. The show's willingness to go to these dark places is part of what makes it compelling. It doesn't talk down to its audience or pretend the world is simpler than it actually is. It acknowledges that life is often absurd, cruel, and unfair, and that the systems meant to protect us often fail or actively harm us instead. The Simpsons shows us the worst of ourselves and our society, and we keep watching because seeing our problems reflected back as comedy makes them slightly more bearable. The show's longevity means it's been documenting American culture for over 3 decades, and that documentation reveals a steady darkening of tone over time. Early Simpsons had genuine optimism underlying the satire. Things were broken, but maybe they could be fixed. The family's love for each other was enough to overcome most obstacles. The good people of Springfield would eventually triumph over corruption and incompetence. That optimism has faded over the years, replaced by a more cynical view where the broken systems stay broken and the characters just learn to cope with dysfunction, rather than fighting to change it. Whether The Simpsons will end has been debated for years, with Matt Groening recently joking that it will continue until Donald Trump dies. What's not up for debate is the indelible mark this show has left on American culture. It's shaped how we think about family, work, religion, politics, and society. It's given us a common language for discussing social problems. It's predicted the future with disturbing accuracy. And it's done all of this while making us laugh at things that probably shouldn't be funny. The dark lore of The Simpsons reveals a show that's far more complex, disturbing, and psychologically rich than its reputation as a simple family comedy would suggest. It's a show about brain damage, mental illness, environmental catastrophe, political corruption, corporate evil, existential dread, and the slow collapse of American institutions. It's also a show about a family that loves each other despite their flaws, a town that perseveres despite constant disasters, and characters who keep going even when they have every reason to give up. That tension between darkness and resilience, between satirical despair and genuine warmth, is what makes The Simpsons more than just a cartoon. It's a mirror reflecting both the worst and best of who we are, and we can't stop watching because we desperately want to see which side will ultimately win. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the complete dark lore of The Simpsons. If you enjoyed this exploration of America's favorite dysfunctional animated family, make sure you subscribe to the Cartoon Codex for more comprehensive analytical content about animated series. Hit that like button if this video made you see The Simpsons in a new light, or maybe a darker light than before. Let me know in the comments which Dark Simpsons moment disturbed you the most, and what other animated series you'd like to see explored in this depth. Until next time, this is the Cartoon Codex, reminding you that sometimes the darkest stories are hidden in the brightest colors.